and welcome to our live Facebook broadcast. We are going to give it a moment for Dr. Nancy Miller-Ihli to join us. But Dr. Nancy Miller-Ihli has been a trainer with nutraMetrix as long as I can remember, and I have been a nutraMetrix consultant. I just celebrated 12 years this spring. And she is the owner of Savvy Selections, and she has helped so many people because Dr. Nancy Miller-Ihli is a product of the product. She has a really fabulous story herself, but her background is that she actually wrote white papers for the government on obesity. And so Dr. Nancy Miller-Ihli is a scientist at heart. And so when we think about the science behind our products and our differentiators with nutraMetrix being the fact that we have the best products with ingredients that were in the clinical studies. But people are going to question you. I get questioned myself all the time. I get questioned, Sarah, why are these products better than other products? I get questioned where people say that, how do I know that these are going to work? How do I know that it's safe for my patients? So that's what Dr. Nancy Miller-Ihli is going to answer. Let's see. I'm going to bring Nancy. She's coming. She's coming. Here we go.
Hi, Sarah.
Dr. Nancy. Hello.
How are you this morning?
We are doing good. Well, the fact that we both got on camera means that I'm doing great. It's going to be a good day.
Yes, I agree.
So I've already introduced you. The audience is warmed up.
Oh, they are.
They are. They're all ready for you, and they're thinking of their questions. But my biggest question is, what were the first questions, Dr. Nancy, that you asked of nutraMetrix? Like, as a scientist, when you're thinking of products, what do you want to know when you say, do they work? What's the science behind it? What are you really asking?
Well, for me, Sarah, it means that there's a focus on a scientifically based, clinically proven ingredient and or product. So, a lot of times people would like to see that there's a double-blind placebo-controlled study or whatever. A very,
That's fine.
I'm out. Way too big, huh?
What does that mean?
Yeah, well, what that means is there's different kinds of study designs. So when I look at a study, a scientific study, I want to know, for example, was it a meta-analysis? That's the kind of study where they take research from a bunch of different studies and combine it together to draw a conclusion. It could be what we call a systematic review. That's where somebody goes through the literature and they look up everything related to an individual ingredient, say pycnogenol. That would be a great example. And there are literally thousands of publications related to pycnogenol. And then there's something that's called a double-blind placebo-controlled study. And that's where you have one set of the people who are receiving a particular treatment. We could use as example the new trim tea where they're getting the well trim, which is one of the key ingredients. And then the other half of the people are what we call the control group or the placebo group. Now, when we have that, what happens, which is kind of cool, is that when it's double blind, it means that the participants don't know if they're getting the study subject, the study material, or if they're getting the placebo. But when it's double blind, it means the researchers don't know either. So that's really, in many people's minds, that's the best kind of study because, we know there can be bias, right? We've all heard of what we call the placebo effect. You give a child a Tic Tac and tell them, that it's going to make them tired, and all of a sudden they want to go to sleep. But the Tic Tac probably wouldn't really have any influence on their ability to sleep. So many people feel that kind of study is the best. But any study can be good if it's got the right components. And that means that what they're trying to evaluate is clearly defined. So back to your original question, you asked me why I love nutraMetrix, and what I see as one of the key advantages is that the company has really searched through the literature. We have a great science team, and Dr. D and all of the folks over at corporate in Greensboro take time to look in the literature to see what's hot and what's not, to see what has good science supporting it. And that's why we create products that are amazing for everyone. And I also think that's why our health professionals can really get behind them, because they don't have to have those concerns. What do you think?
Yeah. I'm looking at the trim tea study.
Right.
Oh, this is okay. And so I was just going to ask you, how do I know what type of study? But it's right in the headline.
Yeah.
So I don't know if everyone knows, but I'll put in the link below. Someone made a great bit.ly link for the TrimT study. So it's just bit.ly/TrimT study. So if you ever want to know how to find it, I don't know who made it, but I know Carrie Robert Smith, maybe she made it, she had posted it. So it's bit.ly/TrimT study. So I'm looking, and right here in the title, it says it's a double-blind, placebo-controlled investigation.
Yeah, so that's the actual publication, and you're
Okay.
right in the actual title. At the end of it, it says that it's a double-blind, placebo-controlled study.
Is that where it's always going to say
No,
what type of study it is?
That was really what I would call, very clear and overt. Typically, you would have to read through it, and just so people can appreciate it, this is a 7-page study with about a, 6-point font. So it's not an easy read, okay? It's not Reader's Digest. And the one thing that I would say to our listeners is that, it's great to have the study if you know how to read the study. But I wouldn't hand out that study to just everybody, because somebody that doesn't understand it might pick out one particular aspect of it as opposed to looking at the whole thing. So the things that I look at when I analyze a study, first, I'm going to look to see what is the focus of the study. In other words, we've seen lots of stuff, and you've heard me talk about studies where people make a conclusion that multivitamins don't help cure cancer. But the study wasn't designed for that. They just drew this conclusion later on. They said, oh, by the way, those people that we gave the multi to starting at age 65, some of them still got cancer. Well, that's not the time to start if you're trying to evaluate the health benefits of a multivitamin, right? So I look at the focus of the study. So the TrimT study we'll use as an example, okay, is very clearly defined. They wanted to see what that mango seed extract was going to do in terms of affecting body weight and metabolic parameters. So they're really clear. The second thing that I look at on a study are the authors and any affiliations. So why do I do that? Well, because you want to know, like who's doing the work. Is it being done at a university? Is it being done by a government lab? Is it being done at a hospital? It's good to know that because it gives you a frame of reference, And so in this particular case, the Well-Trim study was done at a university in Cameroon. And the final manuscript was reviewed by somebody at Wake Forest University. And one of the things is that the products were provided by what's a company called Gateway Health Alliance, and they're the company that makes Well-Trim. Now you might say, well, is that a good thing if they're actually involved in providing product? Well, this is common. I would say 95% of all studies related to food and supplements, they're going to be providing it, because when I worked in research at USDA, we did studies regarding nutritional supplementation. But the thing is that nobody's going to pay for those studies, right? Because it's not like, we were always competing for the same funds, like cure cancer, or should we, look at a study related to health and nutrition, and, which one wins out, and it should. So it's not an unusual thing, and it's not a negative thing that they actually provided some samples for it.
What are some red flags? Maureen is asking, what are some things that when we're looking at what the competing interest is, when would you go, that's not.
If it's a sole author and it's done only by the company at the company. So in this case, it was done by a university. Like at USDA, we often gave funding to universities who had great nutrition departments to be able to run independent studies. So, that just means that they're, I would call them good scientific citizens, which means that they're supporting research at a university, and they're providing something that will be of interest for the individuals who are graduate students and stuff to publish. Does that make sense? Yeah. So when we talk about that, the next thing I look at is what's the impact factor of the journal? And you're like, what is that? So an impact factor measures the number of citations that come from a journal, and it kind of speaks to the quality of the journal. So, an impact factor, there's for the journal that it was published in, which is Lipids in Health and Disease, is around 2.1. And that means that it's in the top 1/3 of all journals, which is good, So when there's a brand new journal, it doesn't mean it's bad, but it takes a while for them to get a decent impact factor, okay? So the next thing I look at is the type of the study and the kind of study, how many participants were there. So if we can use the Well-Trim study again, there would be 102 participants. They had 52 people in the well-trimmed group, and then they had 50 people in the control group. So I always tell the story about when I started with OPC3, that I wanted to have an idea of how effective it was as an anti-inflammatory, right? Yeah. So I went to my doctor before I ever started with it, and I had him do a SED rate and a C-reactive protein. And so, you know, the point on that is that he's a good sport, and so he did those measurements for me, and then I started with OPC, and we remeasured 3 weeks later. So my SED rate and C-reactive protein fell in half, Sarah, so that was fabulous. So that was an experiment of N equal 1, all right? There was no control, right? There was just me, and I got great results. So it was a valid experiment, but you know, the company subsequently went on and did a big study where they actually had, I believe it was 60 participants. And in that case, they saw a 52% reduction for a larger population. So does that make sense? I mean, it's just, it's important to take it into consideration. Like, it doesn't mean that small's not good, but I think we can feel more comfortable if there's a larger number of participants, because we all—
Which is why the nurses study, right? Like, how many people were in the nurses?
Oh, thousands, yeah. and they use the physician study as well for a lot of nutritional things. So, you know, if we're trying to figure something out, because we all are unique, right? And we all can react differently to things. We're all our own little, you know, biochemistry experiment, kind of. So when there's more people involved, we can get a better indication of how well it will work for more people. And I see that a lot of people, Sarah, are asking about where to get a copy of the study. And, you know, it's fine for people to get it. But again, I want to caution people, if you're not really trained in reading a scientific study, you know, you drop it on somebody's desk and say, hey, look at the science behind this, then that just invites them to ask you a lot of questions about, you know, the experimental design and everything. And if you're not a scientist, I'm not sure that it's an advantage. What we would normally recommend for somebody who's doesn't have a scientific background, but who wants to share something more scientific, would be to actually just share the abstract. And the abstract, I'll just hold this up, I don't know if it's backwards or forwards, but the abstract is at the bottom of the page. And people can always go to NIH, they could go to the National Library of Medicine and simply look for the abstract, or you could print out just the first page of the whole study that you've been kind enough to provide the link for, and they'll see the abstract there. And the abstract includes, for example, the background, a summary of the methods, it includes the summary of the results, and it also lists the registration of the clinical trial. And I didn't mention that earlier, but you want, if there's a clinical trial, which means people are being given a particular, you know, treatment protocol to follow, you want to make sure that it's got what we call IRB approval, which means that it's all sanctioned by the medical professionals, making sure that it's safe and when the study's done. So we've made it through the focus of the study. We talked a little bit about authors and affiliates. We talked about the impact factor for the journal and where it's being published. So then the next thing I look at is, what are the hypotheses? You know, like, what question are they trying to answer? And going back to the TRIM-T study, they wanted to see what effect the well-trim would have on weight. And they also wanted to know what effect it would have, for example, on other metrics. So they looked at weight, they looked at waist measurements, they looked at leptin levels, they looked at fat percentage, they looked at adiponectin levels, they looked to see if LDL and total cholesterol changed. They looked at C-reactive protein, which is, I mentioned earlier with the OPC, it's a marker of inflammation. And then they also looked at glucose. So, you know, anyway, that's all the parameters they looked at. And then they were very systematic in their conclusions. There's tons of, you know, graphs and tables and things for us to be able to look at. I mean, you know, again, it takes a little bit of experience with looking at scientific stuff to be able to read all that. But there's a really nice table in it that's been summarized. And we saw a summary of that also at the recent nutraMetrix annual convention. So I think it's a really well put together study. It has 25 references. That's the other thing. So when someone's doing a scientific study, you always want to know that they've taken into consideration other information that's available in the literature, so that you know that they're kind of up to speed, right? Because you know, somebody could just go out and start their own experiment. Why would they not want to build on what's already been done and is already considered, you know, factual when it comes to that particular, you know, subject that you're studying?
when I was a pharmaceutical rep,
Right.
we used to have a lot of literature supporting the drugs that we sold. And I could take one study and go back to the doctor with info on that study 12, 13, 14, 15 times. Because like you said, there's all those charts and diagrams.
Right.
And there are so many times, that they go back and or that they're looking not just at one factor. So I would take this TrimT study, and people always ask, what do I bring, Sarah, for follow-up? And they always want to bring something else. They're like, well, should I bring now MA Web Centers? Should I bring, a different product? I'm like, no, if you led with TrimT, you can go in one time and talk about weight loss. You can go in another time and talk about C-reactive protein levels. You can go in another time and talk about the fat production that went down by 80%. There's a lot there that you can talk about with that one product, with the one study. You go with that and keep driving the point home.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And because many of us are calling on health professionals and perhaps leading with this, they would like to see a copy of the actual study. I just, people want to be sure that they understand what they're highlighting in the study well enough to be able to answer the questions.
Right.
Somebody asked about OPC. So should we talk about that a little bit as well?
Yeah, I'm trying to bring up, because what I really like is, and I'll provide the link. I like that in Lisa Grant's in unlimitedlifestyles.net, she went through and she has one you can print out with the information highlighted.
Right.
That's important. So like you're saying, no one's going to read the whole thing. You're going to look at it as an NC, like not you, Nancy, like me. And I'm an NC. I'm going to be like, that's a lot of stinking words on one page. So I just print it off. A doctor, just because they're a doctor, they're going to think the same thing. That's a lot of stinking words on one page. They don't really want to read all the words either.
You really how we read this stuff though, Sarah? You want to know how I read it really?
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah.
So when I get a paper, I'm first going to read the title, and then I'm going to read the abstract. And then I'm going to flip to the very back where the references are. And typically back there, you're going to find some conclusions. And so I'm going to read at the end of the discussion, they have conclusions. And when they have their conclusions, that's typically like, where do we see this going? What additional research might we need to do? I'm going to read that first to see what their bottom line was before I go back and delve into how did they do it? Why did they do it? What were the results? Did they have enough, participants, and all that kind of stuff? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And your docs are probably going to do the exact same thing. So if you hand somebody a publication, don't be surprised if they scan the first page and then flip to the last page.
Okay. All right. Right. Yeah. So I shouldn't be offended. But do you ever go through and highlight things for docs so they know?
I don't do that for another scientist because they might be offended by that, because everybody wants to, they think different things, but I think doing that for a doc is a fabulous idea.
Okay. All right. Okay. That's good to know. All right. What about OPC3 studies?
Well, I just, before we got on, Sarah, somebody posted and asked about my experience with that and, why OPC was of interest to me, when I was working with the government as a researcher and program leader for nutrition for the U.S. So OPCs are naturally anti-carcinogenic, anti-atherogenic, and anti-inflammatory. And, I mentioned that I did my little experiment of N=1, but the company's subsequently gone on. And we do have multiple publications, one in angiology. And so we have a publication that shows by looking at markers related to the absorption of the OPC3, it shows the improvement in absorption as a function of using the isotonic versus using a pill or tablet. So they did that study for us. So when somebody's asking me about, it makes sense that the isotonics would be way better, but do you have any proof? That's a wonderful thing to be able to use. And it's right in the front of the nutraMetrix catalogs, many of the issues of that. And that, if people just look at the area kind of under the curve, you can see that not only is it more rapid absorption, but it's more complete absorption. So that's a great thing, I think, for people to have, going back and, again, pointing to a study, which is providing us with great info that really makes the science more usable. I think, as a scientist, one of my favorite things to do is to try to translate science into something that people can use on a daily basis. because, like you said, nobody's going to read through 7 pages of tiny font, of stuff. So, my goal is to put it in a format where people can use it more easily and where they can kind of highlight the bottom line. The second study that we have that shows the 52% reduction in C-reactive protein is in angiology. And so it's really focusing on, the cardiovascular markers. But there is so much literature, as you know, Sarah, out there on pycnogenol. Everything from helping women with hot flashes as they're going through menopause to improving circulation to reducing inflammation. I mean, so, if somebody's leading with OPC as a product, once they've gone through the discovery meeting and then they're talking about recommendations for a proposal, then I feel like we have just like a whole multitude of options in terms of great science to support OPC as one of the products you might be recommending.
So now I sometimes, like a lot of people do, is I'll Google, I'll Google pycnogenol and hot flashes or whatever. And I find a Huffington Post article or something that's then was published, on ABC News or, why is that? Is that an okay thing to share with my docs or not an okay thing?
Right. So, as you know, I did a talk on nutrition in the news at the recent conference in Herndon. And, by the time something shows up in the popular press, if it's a legitimate thing, sometimes there can be a little bit of a delay. Because what's the press looking for? They're looking for something that's controversial, something that's going to make people sit up and take notice. So, they want that headline that says multivitamins don't cure cancer or no value to a multivitamin. That's what they're looking for. But, I think to have it in an easily digestible form, I love using the popular press for people, whether it's Huffington Post, will use that example. They do a decent job. But when I look at who is writing those articles, I still am going to look at to see who's doing that. Because sometimes somebody's writing it and they're a science writer, and that's, they may have a little bit of training in science and statistics. Sometimes they're writing it and then they turn around and write an article on makeup, and that doesn't mean that they don't have a background in science, but if they don't share that as part of their credentials, then, I kind of just take it a little bit with a grain of salt. So I think that the popular press stuff, can be helpful because it's already digested, and I'm most comfortable with it when it's done and they actually refer to the original study. So using the Well-Trim study as an example, if it was in the popular press and it said, a recent study on Well-Trim published in Lipids in Health and Disease, that would make me feel more comfortable because that would mean that they weren't just taking it from another abstract, from something else that somebody else wrote. It's kind of like that game we played when we were kids. I don't know if you were a Girl Scout, but I was. And so, yeah, exactly. So one of the things that we used to do was whisper in somebody's ear and then they'd whisper in the next person's and it would go around the circle, right? Well, sometimes what we find with scientific studies is by the time it goes around the circle, it comes out the other end not sounding anything like the original. So yeah, I think there's a lot of value in having it in an easy to understand format, but a little caution's warranted in trying to make sure that they're not going for a sensational headline or that they just don't know what they're talking about. Dee and I sometimes text things back and forth to each other like, did you see this? Like, this is insane.
And it's sometimes it's so old, the data too. So yeah, there's a lot of things that are just misconceptions, without getting into some controversial topics. But
right.
As a mom, I'm in a lot of moms groups and we're always questioning things. And with my background, I know a little more than I'm letting on here in this interview, because I'm trying to say when I was new, what were my questions. But I'm like, I read that study and that's not a good study. It's hard to bash the moms and the lay person and be like, I read that and that had conflicting info and it just kept, snowballing and it still snowballs. And you're like, oh, guys, come on. Like you just keep beating a dead horse there. So just to get headlines. My question.
Oh, go ahead. I was just going to say an interesting point about, how old a study is. And the one thing I would like to say is that there are studies that we consider to be like seminal studies, something that's just, it's really the foundation of further research. And so you'll oftentimes, when you're looking through the references of a recent study, you might see a reference that's a good bit older. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. I just want people to understand you can't just look at a list of references and go, oh my gosh, that's from 1992. Well, it might be that it's like it's a foundational article. And see, that's, I think, another piece of this. You know, if you're an expert in a field and you read a study, that's very different. Like if I were to go over, I'm sure there's wonderful studies on skincare products and stuff. And even though I'm a scientist, I might not understand those nearly so well as the nutrition related articles or a medical article where I have that specific training. Does that make sense?
That makes sense, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's good too for people to remember that doctors are the same way and they don't have necessarily even that nutrition background.
Oh.
And so it is for us. And that's what I want this forum to be, because we have a lot of experts on here and we've had people that have taken time with the studies. You know, I'd rather have everyone on this call understand really well 2 to 3 studies.
Right.
That's what I did as a pharma rep. I didn't know all the science behind my drug. I knew 2 to 3 key studies that I could recite inside and out, and I memorized the bullet points on. You know, I'm going around and it didn't take me that long to memorize 4 or 5 bullet points on the well-trim study.
Exactly.
And now I talk about it. So, so just know that, and know that if you have the study to back it up and you do know the bullet points, like, again, that's what doctors want to know.
Right.
Like, they might scan it if they want you to prove it, but, you know, I think everyone thinks that every doctor is going to be that analytical personality.
Oh, no.
And they're not all like that.
Well, it was really funny because early on in my career working with nutraMetrix, my senior partner is Miller-Ihli. And so she came with me to call on a doctor, and in fact, it was my personal doctor. And it was a really interesting conversation. And I'm like, oh, I've got Arlene there. This is going to be a slam dunk. And she knows everything about sponsoring doctors and everything. And, you know, you don't know, as you know, we never know when we go into an appointment what's going to be most important, right? So we got there, and Arlene started, and she was talking about nutraMetrix and the huge potential and income and, you know, revenue generating wellness programs and all that. And the doctor turned to me and said, well, but I want to know the details on some, you know, you're recommending this OPC. Can you talk to me about the details of the science? And she kind of just went, and take it away, Nance. You know, so you're right that you can't predict, but I don't think that that's generally going to be the number one thing that somebody's looking for. What the kind of things, Sarah, I have this, and I'm happy to post this if people would like to see it, but it's basically a summary of the well-trim study with the key bullet points so that you have that as a starting point to learn it, to understand what are some key aspects of it, and then we can from there, then if necessary, provide the full publication as sort of backup.
I know that's been circulating. Where did that come from originally? Did it come from the vendor?
No, I put it together. Study. So the original thing, the thing here, this picture on the side here with that was provided by Dr. Mark Lang. He presented that when we were in Greensboro, and then he also provided it at Product Symposium. I added the bullet points on the side that added in the data regarding fasting blood glucose, adiponectin levels, C-reactive protein, cholesterol, et cetera. So, you know, I think that, you know, that graph by itself is really phenomenal, but that's not actually in if you were to look at the scientific publication, it's not in there. Okay, so, and I'm not sure if Mark got it from literature from the vendor or not. I'm not really certain where it actually.
Because that's what I do sometimes with our trademarked ingredients. So if I'm going in to talk about probiotics, like I right now have a chiropractor in the funnel.
Right.
I will put into the Google live back, and I will go find, it's not that hard.
No, it's.
And the vendor oftentimes has a marketing pamphlet or a marketing PowerPoint, and I'll just take a screenshot, a slide, or whatever. I'm not even that fancy, as you are, Nancy. I don't even print it. I like literally be like, here's my iPhone. Like, this is what I found on the internet. It's a screenshot. It'll have like my battery percent at the top, you know, and it's like, this is, here you go. Like, I'll text it to you if you want me to text it to you.
Yeah, the reason it got printed, Sarah, was because we did a TLS table for our district on Saturday. And you saw, if you noticed, there was a little thing of trim tea at the bottom, a little empty one. Definitely not a full one with a high demand for it.
Yeah, no one wants them until they walk away. That's what I always say to my doctors. Yeah, you don't think it's going to sell until someone takes it. So I'm just trying to make this really simple for everyone, that the tools are out there. And that, again, is what this group is for, you know, is to say, but it's not going to be for you to tag Dr. Nancy now just say, Dr. Nancy, what is a study on HGH secretagogue? No. It's do a little bit of homework. If you want to post something and say, am I reading this right? Is this, to me, it looks like it's a meta-analysis. Like, is that what it looks like to you? Or to me, it looks like this is a double-blind placebo study. Is that what it looks like to you? Am I right? We can definitely do some of that. And I don't know, maybe we can take like the next week, Dr. Nancy, if you don't mind, and we can do, this versus this study, and
Sure.
Which would you choose?
We could do that.
We can make it fun.
Or we could go through something else related to another one of our products. If you had another ingredient that was hot, that you thought people would, that are using a lot in their proposals for working with health professionals, we could do that. So whatever you would like, let me know. And
yeah, just reading in different ways. So, I think that that's going to be great. I know already in the links you guys have 2 links. You have one to the TrimT study. I've already linked below to OPC3 abstracts and an OPC3 study that's already highlighted for you to be able to give your health professionals. So if you just had those 2 things alone, guys, you can build an empire on this. Like you can build an empire.
Yeah, people are jumping pin levels yesterday in a single day just as a result of TrimT.
In your group?
Or did that? Yes. Val Myers.
No way.
Yeah.
No way. I didn't even know.
I know.
That I'm like getting goosebumps.
On our trainers page. But you heard.
Oh my God. I can't wait. I gotta congratulate her. So exciting.
I know.
So well deserved too. Yeah.
Very well deserved.
That's awesome. And that's what it takes, guys. It just takes a little bit of focus, effort, and consistency. And the people that you're seeing do it, they work their butts off.
Oh,
they absolutely work their butts off. Like you're doing, Dr. Nancy. You're calling me every other day. Got a meeting here, a meeting there, this, and that. And you've got more problems because you're generating more activity. And that's the thing I just want to tell people. When you're generating activity, you're creating problems.
Oh, for sure.
That's what always happens. And so just learn how to eat problems for breakfast. Get over it. Keep going with you. I'm not talking to you, Dr. Nancy. I'm just talking to everyone else.
Right.
But that's what, you're going to generate more issues when you generate success. And you just got to figure out how to figure it out. And then you'll see, the income will follow. But I've been listening in my group this week, one of my accountability groups, we're listening to JR's original Basic 5.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, and he says in it, what do you think? Like, you think if you are JR or you're Dennis Franks, like, of course you'd be successful, right? Just like you thought with Arlene Lowy. Like, you put Arlene Lowy in front of anyone, and of course she's going to be successful.
Right.
But Arlene Lowy, JR, Dennis Franks, they were successful. Yourself, Dr. Nancy, you guys are successful before you even go out because you're successful here.
Right.
And that's what it means. You got to start by saying, I'm a success. I'm doing this. I'm a director. I'm going to make it here. And you got to power pose and you got to, just go out there. And guys, it's not that the confidence will come. It's that the confidence starts here. And we're trying to give you some tools like understanding studies, just so you have the words, right? So you got to, I don't care, prop up your baby, your stuffed animals, your cat, your neighbor, whatever it is, to say, do you mind if I just practice getting the words out about this TrimT study? Because the first time you might not know how to say adiponectin. Is that how I even say it? Is that the right word?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, you just got to say it a couple times, and then it'll roll off your tongue. Pycnogenol, like these are all new words. So, you got to say them a couple times, and that's part of the success up here.
But Sarah, we also need to thank the nutraMetrix team. I really appreciate everything that you do to support the field. And, we have an amazing team of people, whether it's the gals in the office or whether it's you in the field or Dr. D and Brady. Everybody's amazing. And we all can be better as a result of collaborating the way we're doing this. So I thank you very much. I love all your posts on Facebook. And I think doing these live interviews is really very valuable to the field.
Yeah. If you guys want any other topics or experts or things, but I think what we're going to do, a lot of great things came out of the annual convention. So I'm trying to figure out, this was just fresh of mind for you. So, what else can I take? What other segments can we redo, basically? So, we can't hear it enough, the same things. We just need to hear this again and again and again.
Right.
So I hope everyone watches this and tags your team below, gives us a thumbs up, give us some feedback so we know what was helpful about this interview and what you still have questions on. And Dr. Nancy, thank you so much for joining
I had a
us
great
today.
day. It's always fun to visit with you.
Yes. All right. We'll talk soon. Bye-bye.